With that, I guess we're right on time, so let's get going. We're going to be talking about Copilot analytics and using that to improve adoption and ROI. So the story is called The Lady with the Diagram. It turns out that in the Crimean War in the 1850s, it was much more likely that you would die in the hospital from infection than you would on the battlefield. So in fact, you could be wounded and you'd move to the hospital, and they just didn't really have the ways to, treat you. And so this nurse, Florence Nightingale, she came in and she was appalled by this, but no one would really listen to her. And so what she did is she started tracking things very statistically, compiling the analytics. But it wasn't just the data. She then actually created it and visualized it. And they ended up calling that, I got to look this up, the Nightingale Rose diagram, which is actually what we call now like a polar chart. So really, it was both the data analytics and the story that it told through analytics. And so certainly, I'm not Florence Nightingale. I'm not going to, help you if you're in the hospital. But certainly from an analytics perspective, I do want to talk about how we can use that to drive adoption and return on investment with Microsoft Copilot. I'm half consultant. I've deployed hundreds of thousands of Teams voice seats, Microsoft voice seats, and part analyst working with the vendors to help them refine their messaging and sometimes move into the Microsoft ecosystem or understand, how to, sometimes compete with Microsoft as well. Began doing technology stuff way back in the VIC-20 and Commodore 64 days, running this game Jack Attack. And now I host a couple of AI shows, one with Rob Scott on UC Today, which is a little more formal. And we've had like Gurdeep Singh Paul and people. And then with David Maldo, another show, The AI Chefs, has nothing to do about food. It's tips and tricks to get more out of AI. But we have a lot of fun. And because David knows how to use OBS Studio and video, he puts the digital chef's hats on us, and we talk about recipes for a particular AI. So let's talk about, though, analytics. I've created what I'll call, just made this up, the analytics hierarchy of usefulness. It starts with data, and often there's lots of data that's being collected. Certainly, Microsoft has done a great job in all of their tenants, but certainly with respect to Copilot, to capture a whole bunch of data. Now, of course, that data, if you don't understand it, or if you don't look at it, really has no value. Once you kind of understand it and consolidate it, it becomes information, which is better than data. But the truth of the matter is that information sometimes can overwhelm you as well. Eventually, you can take that information and come up with insights. But truthfully, insights are fantastic, but you need to actually have insights that you can do something about. And so they need to be actionable. And in fact, one of the things, and I just added this over the last couple of weeks in conversations, not only does it have to be actionable, but it really needs to be impactful insights. Because a lot of times we see things that we can do something about, but we really want to understand what of the things that we can do, change, what are the things that we should really focus on? And overall, to AI-generated images, both in Copilot that did a good job, because it doesn't always. But, I would say with respect to analytics, like given the telemetry that Microsoft captures for all of its products, going back to Lync and Skype for Business, and certainly, in Teams and the admin center, and obviously with Copilot, I'm disappointed that there's, the lack of use of these analytics. So this is maybe how I look often, because I think people are missing out on it. And so, let's talk a little bit about that in the next several minutes. Did a survey, a study that was released in January 2025. It's up with UC. Well, UC Today, they created another site called AI Today. You can go get the complete kind of survey study. But, obviously people are using Copilot as one of their AI assistants. That's not really a surprise. Surprisingly, they're using a bunch of other things as well. And similarly for generating images, also using, DALL-E 3, which is the image generation model that's a part of Copilot. We asked in this study to share some analytics from it, different questions. So interesting, trying to understand, okay, from a leadership perspective, what do they see, in terms of AI? How do you believe most leadership in your organization view AI? Do they overestimate it or understand where it can be used effectively? The interesting thing here was, and this is, an example of understanding the analytics and the data behind it, 44% of the people said that the leaders understand where AI can be used effectively. It turned out that in the survey respondents, 44% of them, or 43%, identified that they were part of the C-suite. So in a sense, the leaders were just saying, yeah, we maybe understand ourselves. I don't know if that's necessarily true. We also wanted to understand kind of overall, did people, did they exaggerate? Do they believe the vendors are exaggerating the capabilities? And the truth of the matter is probably these first three, when you add them together, that really is saying, the vendors are, as to be expected from a marketing perspective, they are overestimating a little bit or overhyping some of the capabilities. And this is why when we drill into the Copilot analytics, we're going to talk about how you can see if in your organization, if, what you're paying for, you're getting value from. One of the things that maybe analytics could do is they could help expand the pilots, because certainly back at the beginning of this year, but I think that this is consistent. I was at, Enterprise Connect in March, and, a lot of people are piloting, Copilot with smaller groups of users. Very few, well, there was no one in the audience who had rolled it out to any company of, any reasonable size to all their users. But certainly if you could prove the return on investment, that might be, help you move from smaller pilots to rolling it out to, most of the users. And then, we also wanted to understand, and this is qualitative, so, hey, what do you think, what were the outcomes that were observed in your organization as a result of AI adoption? I think a lot of this is wishful thinking because, quite frankly, increased productivity, for the most part, outside of the contact center, with knowledge workers, if I say, how productive were you today? Like there isn't a measurement that you're put in place. So if you increase productivity, it's certainly not a quantitative measure, but we'll look at how Microsoft has created some reports to try to help you build a quantitative model. And lastly, of course, certainly Microsoft and all the vendors would like this to be higher, but even looking ahead a year or two from this study, if you look at it, there's not, the vast majority of people are not going to roll out Copilot, for example, to all of the users, right? So I think that, once again, having the analytics in your organization to show if it is delivering return on investment and who it's delivering return for becomes significant. And then, the truth of the matter is we want to figure this out because people believe that it's likely to give them a competitive advantage, reduce staffing needs. I'm not sure who's part of the 15%, but I think that this is not a winning strategy. So certainly figuring out if indeed this is going to have, a significant impact on businesses, figuring out, where and how to apply it makes significant sense. But once again, I think, analytics needs a purpose. And really, we're going to talk about, okay, like how do you figure out what impact you want to achieve? As we look at these Copilot analytic reports that Microsoft has built in, it's very clear, and I think you need to keep this in mind, that Microsoft's impact is they want you to, buy more Copilot licenses, renew your Copilot licenses. So many of the reports are designed to try to prove and that it has value inside your organization and that the adoption is as high as possible. But here's the thing, full disclosure, I don't have all the answers. There is no enterprise customer that I'm working with that is even leveraging half of this analytics, the Copilot analytics capabilities, and they've radically increased. just this morning, I had done a briefing for Empowering Cloud, 6 months ago on Copilot Analytics, and it showed up on my LinkedIn feed this morning, and I was looking at it and saying, wow, that was a really simple briefing, because at that point, there was like one Copilot usage report that surfaced in the admin center. And now, as you'll see, there's far more reports, and you can just dive in and you can get all kinds of data, but you can also get lots of confusion as well. So here's one of the newest things. You go into the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, and this is front and center. If you haven't looked recently, this is relatively new. It's called the Copilot Control System. They brought together a whole bunch of stuff. If you say, okay, well, what the heck is this? Well, if you see, it's designed to help the organization confidently adopt and accelerate the business value of Copilot and AI agents. Once again, remember that Microsoft's desire is to drive the adoption, of Copilot and help you get the most out of, the paid licenses. So this is definitely front and center. And then if you say what's new, you'll also see that this is really just released in February 2025. So this is, less than 2 months old. So if you haven't looked, or somebody on your team hasn't looked in the, this will be new and show up to them. So if we look at it, Microsoft has done a great job of bringing a whole bunch of capabilities into the single Copilot control system. It lets you do a whole bunch of things. You can, for example, share the latest newsletters. That's really cool. It gives you, brings up the latest newsletter. But an important thing is it makes that available in all kinds of different languages, right? So if you're a multinational operating across different languages, this is fantastic. And it gives you direct access to that. Another thing that you can do here is you've got this track action right up the top there. When you do that, it allows you to say, hey, on this date, April 16th, I think it is, April 16th, I sent out this newsletter, and then you can track your metrics to see, did that action, it'll show up as a data point on your trend and usage graph. You can say, hey, did that actually encourage more people to use different capabilities of Copilot? So, trying to kind of close the loop and have you be able to keep track of what actions are maybe moving people along. When you scroll down this page of the Copilot control system, you'll see you got a whole bunch of other kind of reporting information that they've brought in. So you see you can optimize your Copilot license assignment. This is a very small kind of test tenant. You can see, okay, so this is the active user rate. You can see across the different workloads here, where are they, this is it using in any app, or what are the apps that they're using it in. I would argue that for most organizations, it looks similar to this. Most people use it in Teams. It's hard to move this. And then, very few people right now are using Copilot in OneNote or Loop. A lot of times that's because they don't even know that the capability exists, right? Because this has been rolling out. And at the bottom of this, if you scroll down even more, there's a button that lets you click on Learn More About Usage. And then that brings you into this Copilot usage report that you can drill down in. So, there's a lot of detail here. And here you can see, different things. One of the most interesting things is, there's this Microsoft 365 Copilot chat. That is the free version that is not work-grounded of Copilot. They have separate usage reports. So if in your organization you say, hey, I'm going to give some people the free service and then some people the Microsoft 365 Copilot, that's the paid $30 per user per month version, you can track that usage separately, which is interesting. I think Microsoft hopes that the Copilot chat, the free version, is a stepping stone to hopefully the paid version. At least that's what they're hoping. And then also to call out here is, there's additional reports. You click on that Agents tab. I'm not going to go into every page because it would take 3 hours. But that Agents tab allows you to track the agents that you've created and how they're being used inside your organization. Once again, that's an area that Microsoft is definitely trying to push, because even with the free version, you can use agents, but those agents incur consumption billing costs. So obviously Microsoft would love all the free users to use the agents because that'll generate some additional revenue for Microsoft. So if you refer to this now, to kind of show you just the depth of the analytics that you can get lost in, you can see that in this middle box, it says deliver insights to your IT team leader. And if you click on that, that opens this Copilot dashboard. So let's take a look at that. So this, this is now, as you'll see, it's now part of Viva Insights, right? So they've expanded Viva Insights to include some very specific Microsoft Copilot information. So you can see how in different areas, how Microsoft is going to argue that Copilot can transform your work. So you'll see a lot of statistics here. So meetings, 3.8 times faster to summarize a meeting. This is helping you from maybe your perspective, but certainly from Microsoft perspective, try to say, hey, this is how we're going to justify the value of that paid Copilot SKU. So if you look at this, you can see just, around meetings, here's some stuff where it's claiming, around chats, documents, how it helps there, emails, and Copilot chat. So we'll take a look in a little bit at kind of some more detail here. But once again, we started at this Copilot Control Center. We dove into usage. Now we're on this Microsoft Copilot dashboard. So certainly a significant increase. And there's, details behind all of these if you drill down into that. One of the ways that they're also trying to do this is to allow you to track the impact inside your organization. And so as part of Viva Insights, they share some global benchmark statistics. And the important thing to note here is they're showing you this statement, but these are qualitative results, right? So these are people globally that answered surveys that said, using Copilot helps me improve the quality of my work or output. So that's so the global benchmark is 68%. In this particular tenant, we haven't sent out the surveys, but you can, using Viva Insights, and they've made it free. There's a free version of Viva Insights. You can send that out, and then you can kind of capture how your benchmark compares. But if we look let's go here. I'm going to try to go to this link. Oops. Sharon, let's see. Oh, it doesn't want to share this. Okay, well, we won't go. But here, I'll just bring this up. One of the things, so if you click on this link, which is not coming up here, but there's a lot of detail behind kind of how you handle this sentiment. And, I would encourage you, and I've included this in the presentation, this is pages and pages of the detail behind the sentiment and how to kind of send out the results, capture the results, interpret the results. And, once again, I just remind you that this is fantastic, but it is qualitative data. And certainly the experience has been that when you give somebody a Copilot license, whether they're, whether it's helping you complete tasks faster, for the most part, people will say that they don't want to give back the license because whether they're using it fully now, they expect to use it. There's a bit of the halo effect where they generally will say, yeah, Copilot's doing a whole bunch of good stuff for me. So I think, qualitative results are an important part to combine with quantitative. But it also should be taken with a grain of salt. So here, let me just. So I've moved. So we were just in the optimized Copilot assignment. I agree 100% with this tip here, which is encourage users to use Copilot on a daily basis. Like the experimentation and incorporating AI assistance, Copilot into your daily workflow is a significant, thing that's going to drive ongoing adoption. Because what we see in a lot of organizations is it's super nifty, and I try it at the beginning, and I do some fun things like have it write some stuff for me, write an email, you write a poem about something. But then a lot of times, if you look at the trend line, it drops off. So certainly, they're doing some scoring here in terms of your AI assistant score. It says, to get 100, all licensed users must have used any Copilot feature for more than half of the working days over the past 28 days. So that's what Microsoft says is 100. You have to decide if that's good enough to justify the cost of the licensing that you've deployed. So if we, go back to the bottom right here, now you have this additional thing called the AI assistant score. So I think it's great that Microsoft has brought all this together, but it also shows you that, Microsoft is a large organization. So I feel like they've got, lots of people working on a whole bunch of different reports. They have brought it all together, but you can, drill down into all of these, different capabilities. We get to here, they've come up with this adoption score. And you can see little notes like they tweak things. Here they say on January, we changed how we calculated it. I don't know if they made the scores go higher or lower, but they changed the methodology for calculating this. This is part of the overall adoption score, which used to be the product called the productivity score. And then people said, well, wait a second, that doesn't really measure productivity. So then they changed it to call the adoption score. But because AI, the AI piece of it, the AI assistant, you'll notice it says it's in preview. They don't want to drive down what they call the adoption score. So this is not yet included in that overall adoption score. So if that's not confusing enough, I'm sure they'll change it, moving forward. And then, the other thing that I didn't even know existed till I started putting these slides together is if you look at on the far right, it says leverage user feedback to business delight. There you go. It kind of rhymes. But in Insights, what happens is if you've enabled it in your tenant, Microsoft pops up and it'll ask you how you're liking the different products. And that NPS information, Microsoft captures it for their own benefit. But if you enable it, and if you're a larger organization, because there has to be more than 30 respondents, so it doesn't work for a small or medium size, it's a very small business, you can go into the Admin Center and get these NPS scores for your organization. So I think a lot of really large organizations probably are not happy to turn this on. But if you do turn it on, you do get this, net promoter score information that's available and is kind of interesting. You can see, and as well, any textual feedback, they do sentiment analysis on it. So whatever the user writes, they say, was that a positive comment or, negative comment? They'll show you the trends of the, kind of open-ended text comments as well. They don't show it to you on a individual user basis, of course. So it's not like you can go say, hey, Bob, why the heck are you giving such low scores on Copilot? But you can get an overall, look at that. But let's talk about, so we've got a ton of analytics. I'm going to say at least it's at the information level in terms of usefulness, and perhaps it provides some level of insights. But ultimately, we want to use this to, drive some return on investment. And here's a couple of things that we know about return on investment. With any technology deployment, you're not going to get any return on the investment if people don't use it, if they don't adopt it. And I think for a long time, a lot of the reporting focused on usage. So those are things like, number of messages, number of times, number of prompts, number of calls. But the truth is, it's really about adoption. It's really saying which people are using it. And you want broad-based adoption. Certainly you want everybody who you've assigned a paid Copilot license to be using it on a regular basis. So we know that. We also know that calculating the value that Copilot is deriving for an individual user is in fact difficult. And we also know that training is a significant factor that can drive adoption. If I don't know a feature exists or I don't know how to use it, I'm unlikely to adopt it. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about training. That's a key part of, using Copilot to, training is going to drive the adoption, and hopefully that'll show up on the analytics, and we can calculate the return on investment. So if we go back to this UC Today study, if we say, what are the challenges? Well, the most significant challenge that was cited by 32% of the people was user training as an impediment to using AI effectively. And I would argue that the second one, identifying use cases where AI helps, is probably also a training and awareness thing. If I'm not aware, for example, that I can use Copilot in OneNote, not surprisingly, that the adoption of Copilot in OneNote is pretty much zero. And we've done other studies. I did a study, and this is several years old, but when we do kind of follow up smaller studies and surveys, this really hasn't changed. I mean, IT pros might believe that they're doing a decent job of training, but consistently end users say, I did not receive adequate initial training, and I did not receive adequate ongoing training. And these originally were related to your UC solution, but I would argue that in the Microsoft Teams, that's where Copilot is surfaced, the best in a sense. That's the best Copilot experience. And the interesting thing is, users for the most part, this applies to Teams plus Copilot, they don't believe that they have a good understanding of the features, but which is sad is, they say they would be more effective if they had a good understanding. So once again, making the argument that you can really never do too much training. Well, so and Microsoft knows this, and so they've created what I'm going to say is an overabundance of materials. It's not at Microsoft, it's not like there's lack of training materials. It's in fact that there's so many training materials created in so many different areas that it can be overwhelming. And so what I hope to kind of share with you is some of the things that you should be aware that exist and think about how you can use that. So one of the things they have is this Copilot Success Kit. It has a whole bunch of things as part of it. Here's the list. There's a button that says, here's what's in the full kit. Fantastic. A whole bunch of things. Importantly, there's a whole bunch of customizable email and Word docs. So you can take these and you can then add your own branding or add your own business processes or remove things that you don't want people to use. So fantastic list of information. And then on top of it, which is fantastic, is all of this information is available in all these different languages. So certainly, you don't have to worry about translation cost. So this is definitely something you should take advantage of. It started and it was, basically just in English, but they've rolled out, a whole bunch of different languages for all of these materials. And there's a tremendous amount of them. Now, really, I started in that Success Kit, but I'm going to say that probably where you should start is at this adoption.microsoft.com/Copilot. This really is, I'm going to say the jumping off point for this huge amount of information, including if you're, an enterprise, that's one thing. You probably have a training, communication, learning team, but it's very different for small and medium businesses. But have no fear, Microsoft got a team to create all kinds of Copilot for small and medium businesses because they, and once again, it's got a very targeted SMB success kit, realizing that, you may not have a whole IT department in smaller organizations. So you've got all of that. But if we go back here on this adoption.microsoft.com, if you want a catalog of the resources that are available for training and driving user adoption, you really kind of scroll down this page. And then they've created this other guide where they've done it by personas. So if you're leadership, here's all the things to get ready, onboard, engage, deliver, and then extend and optimize. Targeted at leadership, user enablement, a whole bunch of other particular resources, technical readiness. So if you're the IT pro or even some of the developer stuff, you end up getting into all of this. And then all those purple boxes is also a gateway into a deeper rabbit hole. So for example, the Copilot Skilling Center, if you click on that, now we even have some additional kind of personas, leaders, champions, IT pros, developers, business users. I don't understand like business users and champions. They seem like they overlap, but don't worry, you've got so many materials at your exposure, and if you want to learn, and this is where it becomes overwhelming, I went to Microsoft Learn, fantastic site. There's 166 items, but then I said, okay, well, let's just look at the modules. So those are the training modules. There's 123 learning modules just related to Microsoft Copilot. And some of the modules are like 2 hours. The shortest one I found was like 17 minutes. So let's say it's a 30-minute modules. This is over like 60 hours of learning, which in a sense is overwhelming. It's like your neighbor who's growing carrots, and then they grow a zillion carrots and they bring you this bushel of carrots. Like, I like carrot cake, that's fine. But a lot can be too much. And with regard to Microsoft training materials, you or someone has to help most organizations curate all those materials, because there is a lot of overlap, and you really have to, make sure that you don't get overwhelmed on that. Because the second thing is like, nobody's going to sit down and listen and watch 60 hours of, training materials. That's a week and a half full time, right? Unless you take 2 weeks off. The thing on the training, when we ask end users, okay, what is your preferred form of training? Well, take a guess. What form of training would end users prefer? You can do in person, lunch and learns, on demand. Anybody? Lunch and learn, okay. That might be one of the most effective ways, because you can get people. End users, for the most part, answer that they would choose on-demand training. Why they choose on-demand training? They're not going to do the training. They're too busy doing their day-to-day job, but they say on-demand training. And if you actually track, if you have a system that tracks what training actually gets watched, it's pathetically low. They say on-demand because they know most organizations don't make time in the day away from your regular job to actually, take the training. And this is the same that applies to the IT pros that are responsible for rolling out Copilot or, making the business case. You have to both curate the training, because it's an overwhelming bushel of carrots that Microsoft has created, but you also have to, figure out a way to set aside time for end users. Lunch and learns are great, because a lot of times they're going to have lunch anyway, and you bring in pizza, and you can actually get some participation. That's obviously for organizations where people are still coming into the office occasionally, right? But so that's an important part to think about. In terms of, just kind of wrapping up some of this thing, so we have some time for questions or comments. It's of critical importance to decide, like, what are you trying to achieve, so that, that impactful analytics, and make sure that you're asking yourself, okay, how am I going to measure this? A simple thing is people say, well, I want to use Copilot to improve productivity, or quality, or creativity, or innovation, or whatever you say. That's totally fine. But do you have any idea how you're going to measure it? I think that this is one of the reasons that AI has surfaced so strongly in the contact center, because it's really easy. Everything in the contact center is measured. But with respect to knowledge workers, it's much more difficult, because the knee-jerk reaction is most leaders say, I want to improve productivity. And the problem is that they don't have a benchmark. They don't know how they're going to measure it. They're not measuring it now. And maybe it's not worth measuring. Maybe success for you, it's okay if success for you is just deploying Copilot. That's fantastic, in fact. Maybe you're at an organization where you don't have to justify it. Or, maybe success is just getting adoption. If people are using it, that's good. I can track people are using it. I don't have to do the math to prove if they're getting, are they getting a return of $30 or more per month? Because maybe the organization says, okay, that's fine. But maybe they say that, it's okay to qualitatively, I'm going to survey my users. And if my users say that they believe that, Copilot is making them more productive, that's fantastic. And if that's your organization, move forward with that, because that's easy. If, on the other hand, your organization says, I need to prove it, I want you to do the business case, okay, that's where it gets very complicated, right? Because you're being asked to prove the return on investment in both the licenses, but it's also the training time. I mean, to train people on using these tools effectively does take, a significant amount of time. For sure, if you're not looking at all these analytics reports, take a look at them. Microsoft has some good tips and tricks, and they certainly have some shortcuts into the latest, and they'll keep you up to date in terms of what's new with Copilot. I don't want to have that disappointed face because you didn't even bother to look at them, right? So for sure, look at them. When you do look at the analytics reports, and this is okay, a lot of times you look at those reports and you end up with more questions than when you started. But that's an okay thing, because at least you're saying, well, why is that? Okay, I did something, it went up, it went down. What happened here? And I don't know the answer, but asking more questions, I think, is moving you in the right direction with respect to, understanding analytics and making them move up the pyramid to kind of insights. So, keep asking why? Okay, so the end users are saying, that qualitatively they're not, this isn't helping them. Well, why is that? Why is this? Or this group is using Copilot in these ways. Why are they, why have they been successful? Okay, they did this, so they have champions. Okay, but why did the champion program work effectively? But certainly if you're using, a bunch of the calculations where Microsoft is trying to help you figure out, the savings in things, there's lots of pages, and Microsoft has been good about disclosing it. Like they'll say, this is our research. We did, 127 knowledge workers was the base, so it might have been a small research sample. But there is all the fine print. So if you're using those to make the business case, because somebody's asking you, and if you're going to own that, do kind of click into all those links and go deep to read, kind of all the fine print. And there's a lot of quantitative metrics and as part of those reports from an adoption perspective, but it's both a combination of the quantitative and qualitative metrics that are important. So I think, whether it's through some of the Viva Insight tools or whether it's, don't be afraid to just survey your end users and ask them, how is this working? Don't be afraid to ask them, did you get enough initial training? When you onboard people, now that if you're going to roll out Copilot, did you include that in the onboard training? Did the people that started with your organization, do they think they received enough initial training? Certainly, don't be afraid to ask those questions. I know I've worked with IT groups at large organizations. They don't want to do that survey because they're afraid of the results. But I'm going to say, especially with Copilot, that qualitative metrics is really what you need to combine with those quantitative metrics. And regardless, you're not doing enough training. There's a tremendous amount of training materials. It keeps changing too. So this ongoing training becomes significantly important. Copilot in Excel, for example, over the past month has gotten substantially better. It used to be, it was sort of useless and, pretty much it couldn't do things you expected it to do in Excel. Now, at least in some tenants, because it rolls out over time, and it is substantially better. So if you had trained people in Excel over a month ago, now it's kind of out of date. And so once again, there may be capabilities that would help people, and there may be training that says this is how you can particularly use it. And lastly, and maybe this is the ultimate Copilot analytics irony, Microsoft just released a new analyst agent that thinks like a skilled data scientist. So you can go from raw data to insights in minutes. So maybe to prove the value of Copilot, you simply need to use more Copilot agents. And with that, I have some time. I will leave you to for questions or comments. That is lots of Copilot analytics. Questions? Comments? Who's looked at those Copilot analytics reports? You saw the new Copilot control system? Okay, because it had a Copilot usage report, and it was really easy to explain, right? So, and someone over here has also looked at some? When you looked at that, did it have value to you and your organization?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, particularly seeing where people are using it, which apps are using it,
Right.
that was helpful. Kind of helps through training, consults, helps kind of know what to target on.
Right.
Yeah, I found it useful, but I need to dig in more. A bunch of really good stuff.
Yeah, and were you aware of all those training materials? Because quite frankly, until I put these slides together, I wasn't as well because it keeps changing. So there's tons of training materials that hopefully you can leverage. If there's any other questions or comments? Yeah.
One question comment. One of the things I hear often from people during training is, I forget that it's there.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, have you seen anything, or how do you answer that?
I think that this is really where you're changing your behavior, and this is why I think a lot of times adoption falls off, because you do it, it's the new shiny thing, you try it, but if you don't incorporate that into your day-to-day, the things like creating a Teams channel to have a prompt of the day or the prompt of the week, like people that start in, like I know people start their week and they're like, hey, summarize my week, or at the end of the week, write a summary of what I did this week that I can send to my boss. I think as soon as you have a regular cadence, ideally it's daily, but if it's weekly and every Monday you run a particular prompt that sets you up for the week, I think that's the only way, right? Because if it's I have to think of this as an extra step, we see the AI adoption that's what I call behind the scenes AI. It's all the AI that, like background blur, that's AI. Noise removal, that's AI. Meeting transcripts, that's pretty easy. So you see huge adoption in a lot of organizations. That might be the only thing. And so those organizations have to say, is meeting summaries, is that worth $30 per user per month? Because there are cheaper ways to do it if that's all you're using, including, Teams Premium, but there's also other products as well that are less expensive. And so what I find is you got to get people over that hump. And, I think another interesting thing about the deployment of Copilot is it works better when you do it in clusters of people. Because those people can say, hey, I wrote this really interesting prompt and I'm in finance, and maybe that would be of use for you. Because traditionally, like if we were rolling out Teams Phone, we would sprinkle it around. We'd say let's try one executive assistant, one exec, one salesperson, and because you wanted to see if the coverage worked. But I think with Copilot, if you're doing a pilot, it would be better to pick 20 people in sales or 20 people in any group, because then they can hopefully share amongst themselves. And a lot of times, and this is what I love about prompting, it's like every week somebody will say, oh, I do a prompt to do this. And I'll say, wow, I never thought of that, but that was a really good idea. And in your organization, you want to kind of create those clusters where people remind each other to kind of use it on a regular basis. That was a great question. Okay, with that, I'm going to thank you for your time and have a good rest of the afternoon.